My name is Martin Madert with the Witness to War Foundation, and this following interview is part of the United States Marine Corps Vietnam Tankers Association History Project. The interview is being conducted at the VTA reunion in St. Louis, Missouri on September 24th, 2017. The interviewees are members of the VTA. The purpose of the History Project and the interviews is to capture the experiences of our Vietnam veterans and make them available for future generations.
Yeah, my name is Kelley. Dates of service. I got to Vietnam November of 1966, rotated out December of 1967, and I was in the 3rd Marine 2nd Platoon Alpha Company, and the tank I was on was Alpha 24.
And if you could tell me about the experience you were looking to share today.
Well, there's a number of them. The particular one I thought would be of interest was a place called the Washout, which is just south, a couple of clicks of Con Thien. And it was called the Washout because the road at that point had been washed out. The Seabees had built a bridge, and now it became a target. So it's a point of vulnerability. And if the NVA had been able to take the bridge out, well, then they're really cutting off the supply line to Con Thien. And we, a small group, there were only 2 tanks south of the river that had washed out, and I think there were 1 or 2 tanks north of the river. We had been there for several weeks, and occasionally you'd get, if you're out, you're going to get some incoming mortar, incoming artillery, whatever. You kind of expect that. I had been in country already for 11 months. I was pretty seasoned. You never get fully seasoned. You don't want to get too comfortable, and you can't. So one night, this particular night, I think we were on 50% alert. I mean, the contact was almost imminent, I guess. So the word was just a high degree of probability that we're going to get hit tonight. We didn't know what that meant, hit by what. So I was up on guard duty. It was probably about 1:30 in the morning. We were on 50% alert, which meant that 50% of whomever you're with has to be on alert. We have a 4-man tank crew, which meant 2 of us are awake. Well, in fact, it was just 1 of us, because we had spent countless nights on 50% alert, 100% alert. Bottom line was, as long as somebody's awake, we're okay. And you kind of get used to it, and you're so tired by the time that comes. So I remember distinctly just being able to try to stay awake about 1:30 in the morning or so. And then I had no problem staying awake because we got rained in on by 4 or 5 really big explosions hit the hill. We were a small hill about the size of a baseball field south of the river. And the artillery rounds landed. And you can be sure everybody's awake at that point. The next thing that happened was we started to feel there's something wrong with the air. In fact, even though it's against the Geneva Convention, we were in fact being gassed. Your eyes are bleeding, and it's hard to breathe, and it's hard to see. In the meantime, we're listening to mortars being tubed. And for the combat folks out there who have heard a mortar being tubed, it's a distinct sound. It's a toop. Is that really a mortar? The fact that night, hundreds of mortars were in the air at once, and it was like a machine gun of toot, 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 going off in the jungle. So we knew that all these mortars are up in the air. Well, thank God most of them hit just on the south side of the hill over our heads. Had they rained down on the hill, it would have been a little bit worse. In the meantime, we're still being gassed. My tank commander is ground guiding us out to our battle position, which means getting closer to the perimeter. We were stuck kind of into the perimeter. This is all happening around 1:30 in the morning. So we got out to the perimeter, and by that time, they had already started coming through the wire. And so we had an objective of about 60 degrees where I could swing my azimuth indicator back and forth and just spray 30 caliber machine gun fire as they were coming. And it wasn't a constant coming, but every so often there would be, a wave. We were firing canister rounds, which is like a big shotgun shell coming out of the main gun of the tank, until a canister round broke in the breech, and we didn't have time to clean it out. So we were pretty much down to 30 caliber and 50 caliber machine gun fire. This went on and went on and on. And your average firefight in Vietnam lasts a matter of minutes. We were doing this for well over an hour and a half. We burned up, almost all of the 30 caliber machine gun ammo that we had. And a tank has 2 banana boxes full of 30 caliber machine gun ammo. Each banana box holds 2,200 rounds. We went through about 4,000 rounds of 30 caliber. We burned out a barrel that night. It got so hot it was just cooking off the rounds. And others who have been in firefights, the 30 cals are, getting so hot, you have to spin that barrel out. And we had a great loader, Calderon, little Mexican guy, but he was the best. He spun that barrel out with his asbestos gloves, spun in the next one, counted back the headspace, and threw it back in there, and we were set to go again, all in a matter of less than a minute.
I've heard those barrels get so hot you can see.
You could actually see the bullets going out. That's exactly right. I could look over on the other side of the main gun and see that the barrel itself was almost a yellow red hot because the bullets were cooking off, and I'm wondering what's going on because I'm the guy with the trigger. And he had to pull the linchpin out and take that machine gun out. And like I say, he was just a well-oiled machine by that time. We were a crew that had been together for quite a while. So anyway, this is going on and on and on. And then finally, we got Puff. And for those of you who don't know what Puff is, it's a cargo plane with a minigun. And it's sort of like the greatest savior in the world. When Puff comes, typically the NVA are going to be DD-mowing out of there. But also, it was already starting to seem as though it was getting light. And when Puff came, we started to also drop the parachute flares and started to illuminate places around there. Well, like I say, I had been in country for quite a while, and I was already 10 or 11 months into the gunner's seat and already suffering from a little touch of claustrophobia. Sitting there for an hour and a half or 2 firing, there was a little lull. And I told my tank commander, I'm getting out of here, I have to take a leak. He said, no, take a leak in one of the empty 90 millimeter casings. I said, no, you don't understand, I got to get out of here and I have to take a leak. Not that I have to get out of here and take a leak. So I got out, and just as a flare, a parachute flare, made its eerie little whoop, 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 and puffed off. I had just finished doing my thing, and not more than 30 feet from me, just as it was being illuminated, there's a soldier running by, and it wasn't one of us. And I caught him out of the corner of my eye. I'm not going to get into the personal things that happened at that point. Suffice to say, I made it out of there, jumped back into the tank. And then the next thing I recall was, well, it was all over. And if you've been in combat and when it's all over, there's a ocean of adrenaline, and there is a unbelievable relaxation that you have when you finally realize that you've been so tense for 2 hours but you don't know it until it's over. So the sun is rising, and we poked our heads out and took a look around, and it was pretty much utter devastation. A lot of people were down on both sides. That was the longest battle fight, whatever, that I was in while I was there. There were, and that was for the most part what happened at what Jim Cone in his book Contian calls Bastard's Bridge. We always called it the washout, same place. And he told me recently, he says he and his platoon were up at Contian, and they were watching intently the tracers and the explosions for this coming from our battle, because they want to get off of Contian, and they knew if the bridge was taken that night that they would have been cut off, and there was no way that they could have gotten resupplied or gotten off of Contian. So they were probably just as happy as we were that that battle was over. That's pretty much what happened at the washout. There were a couple of other occurrences. There were many, many occurrences, but there's a couple that I wanted to touch on here. And this is kind of like the I don't want to say the positive and the negative. I want to say the point counterpoint. Let's put it that way. So for instance, coming off of one of our operations, Buffalo, there was a time when we had to take our tank, and a lot of tanks had to go back in and retrieve the dead and wounded. And we're loading people up, and I'm on the back of the tank, and different bodies and that are gone, and others who are still alive are being handed up to me, and I'm looking at the bodies being handed up to me, and one was a guy who was still alive, a young kid, my age, and I loaded him on the back of the tank, and he had lost so much blood, his skin was almost opaque at the time, and he looked up into my eyes, and he said at the time, he says, "I'm going to die, aren't I?" And I said, No, lying through my teeth. "You'll make it, just hang on." And of course, when we made the 5-minute trek back out to the LZ, I jumped out of the tank, and of course he was gone. That's the point. Counterpoint is, we're on another operation. This is in the DMZ, probably into North Vietnam. I mean, there wasn't a sign that said entering North Vietnam, so it's very hard to tell whether you're really in it or not. And we had gotten into a pretty serious engagement. And we had a chance to, after we were exchanging fire, there was a little lull. We jumped out of the tank, and I found this dead NVA not 20 feet from our tank. Coming across a dead enemy in Vietnam didn't happen very often. It didn't happen very often because one of their tactics was pulling their dead away, so you would have no way of really knowing what you've inflicted as far as their losses go. And that was part of their counter psychology. Found this dead NVA soldier, rolled him over. Well, my friend just said, "Oh, he could be booby-trapped." No, could be, but anyway, he wasn't. Went through his belongings in his pack, and he evidently was the regimental guide or whatever, because he had a pack full of medals, and he had a regimental flag in his pack. And I'm feeling pretty good. Oh my God, look at all these war trophies. I went through his pocket, pulled out his wallet, or little thing that he probably called a wallet, I don't know. And I opened it up, and inside his wallet was a picture of him and his wife and his little baby girl. And at that point, and then I said to myself, these are people we're killing. And although it didn't hit home in such a way that, gee, I shouldn't be killing people, it wasn't just the enemy I was killing. And it was the first time that I had come to that conclusion that this guy is just doing his job, and I'm just doing my job. And you have to be very calloused about it. After war, you can sit back and say, oh my God. But during war, you just have to say, job well done. I did my job. Sorry. So there's a little juxtaposition there, you know, the point, the counterpoint. I saw so many atrocities, so many times, one time in particular, we had to, and we don't do this in the Marine Corps, we had to leave somebody behind where we shouldn't have been engaged off of a road sweep, but we had a boot lieutenant who decided, tanks, go in there and take that, there was a machine gun nest that was firing. And actually, in fact, those of us who had been in country long enough knew you don't engage unless you know the strength of your enemy. You got to recon it a little bit. No, just charge right in there. Well, that wasn't a smart thing to do. We got in there, and one of the tanks got knocked out. We had to pull it out. We're back on the road, a couple of guys. One of the tankers that got medevaced out. A lot of grunts got killed. And we sat there back on the road that we had been sweeping, 100+ yards away from where we had been. You could hear one of our brothers in there screaming. And I was so infuriated, I wanted to kill that second lieutenant right there. We didn't go back in. We didn't have the firepower. We went back about 2 days later and swept through the area and found what the enemy had done to this guy. And I won't even tell you because it is so grotesque, and I think it's just something that is not something that I want to be recorded as saying. Let's just say that all the atrocities that the news media, went out and explained to the people back home that the American soldiers were committing in Vietnam. Let's just say that they had a way of doing it to us that was unbelievable. So,
was this before or after you found the dead in VA?
It's hard to say, and I'll say that in honesty because it's been 50 years.
Of course.
And at this point, it's like a patchwork of memories for me. I didn't even know what the names of the operations were that I was on. I was the gunner on a tank, and I went where my tank commander was telling my driver to drive, and I shot where my tank commander swung the turret around for me to shoot. And I think that was before. I think it was before. It was just south, and the whole time I was there, it was in an area called I-Corps, more particularly Leatherneck Square, and it was all from Cam Low, Dong Ha to Cam Low, up to Contian over to Geolin. You can draw a rough square there. Only several miles, but it was an intense several miles, and spent the whole summer of '67 there, which was folks back home are where I'm from, they're rooting for the Red Sox to win the pennant, and I'm back there thinking, okay, if I can stay alive, I'm doing my job too. So, but I mean that's about all I.
And speaking of the atrocity, as I know about I-Corps, they had a lot of civilians evacuated out of there. But did you ever encounter any of those villages?
Oh yeah. The northernmost refugee camp in South Vietnam at the time I was there was Cam Lo, and I actually was friendly with a little girl who lived there, as a refugee from North Vietnam. But for the most part, north of Cam Lo, all the way to the DMZ, there were no villages. That was all what we call the free fire zone. If it ain't one of us, it's one of them. And I think I'm very thankful for that because I had come from sort of the rear area for a little while where you had to call in, get permission to engage the enemy and all. And we went up to Leatherneck Square where, like I say, if you see a soldier and it's not a U.S. soldier, then it's the enemy. If you see anybody, typically it was the enemy. Yeah, we had ARVNs, up in Geolin with us. I don't recall them being up in Contian. No, that was my summer of '67.
That sort of strengthened your resolve to see those civilians have escaped the communists to, come under your protection?
Yeah, there was as a kid. I'm 19 years old at the time. As a kid, the last thing that's crossing your mind then is the society that is South Vietnam, or the society that is North Vietnam, and the politics of and whether you're fighting communism or not. That's all a reflection later. While you're there, you're really not too interested in other than you and your tank crew doing the best job you can. Yeah.
I kind of want to go back and talk about maneuvering tanks in this part of the world. I think when a lot of people think about Vietnam, they don't think about moving armored vehicles. Tell me about the difficulties you had in getting from one spot to another.
Well, okay, there's where we were in that area. The only time it became very, very difficult was during the monsoon season, when the mud would oftentimes get to be over a foot deep. And of course, the other problem with tanks was you basically had to be on a road. But and the NVA knew it, and the NVA would mine the roads nightly. I mean, if you went from the washout to Contien last night, well, you better not do it without sweeping the road for mines the next morning, because they could be right in front of you and you wouldn't see them. And so there was always mines, and there was always a mine sweep detail. The difficulty in the south must have been greater because it was a little bit boggier or whatever, but tanks are a great, big, huge beast, but they're delicate in certain ways. I mean, you can't run over concertina or barbed wire with a tank. It'll get caught up in the sprocket, and you can throw a track. If you hit a mine, it'll blast your track off, and you're basically dead for a few hours while you have to, loosen things up and put new blocks in, and then retighten your track and all that. So even the smallest mines would knock a track off a tank, which is essentially disabling it for at least a period of time. It took a pretty healthy mine to really knock a tank out. Most of them were just, we went over, I think I tripped over maybe 3 mines the whole time I was there. But that was basically a big boom. It would just knock you in your seat. But few tanks hit some pretty devastating mines, and it would just knock the hell out of the tank. Yeah. So.
And you mentioned a lieutenant that didn't leave a great impression on you, but is there a leader that really did make an impact on you in a positive way?
Oh God, I had one. When you say leader, rank is almost irrelevant in Vietnam. People lead by example. Great leaders command respect. They don't have to demand respect. And I had one gunny who was a card, and he was up at the washout with me. I think he actually got wounded that night. And he was funny. He was an older guy. I mean, I was 19, but he may have been 40 something. To me, that was an older guy. And he was so cool under fire. I remember when he got wounded, he got a piece of shrapnel in his eye. I guess they knocked his eye out and took a piece of his face. And they had him all bandaged up on the back of a mule. A mule is a Jeep with a flatbed. They had taken out all the wounded one night. I think it was that night we got overrun at the washout. I know it was at the washout. And he had the presence of mind to be even then cool. From the back of the mule to the 50 feet away was the tank. He yelled out, "Bring me my pipe and my Playboy and no smoke signals." And no smoke signals was code talk for don't notify my next of kin. So you don't send smoke signals. I don't want my wife or my children to know I was wounded, in other words. But the presence of mind for somebody like that, to the consummate Marine, if you will. But as a tank commander, he instilled in us a trust, and that's what a leader does. And so it comes in all forms. There's a prick in every line of work, and we had them there. And the saying there though was, "Hey, I'm in Vietnam. It can't get much worse." But no, that was the one person really that I felt was a good leader.
Well, we're coming up on the end of our time, but is there anything you'd like to wrap up on? Any words of advice for any future generations?
Yeah, I would like to maybe say just one little thing here, which is, if you have a loved one, a father, a brother, or son, or whatever, that person has been in combat. That person is a hero. The people who get medals are people who have been seen doing heroic deeds. There's others out there who should have gotten a medal, but no one saw them do it. So suffice to say, in my mind, for those of us Marines that suffered through real combat, there should be a medal for. There's the combat action medal and ribbon, but there should be, for the families recognized, this person as a hero in my mind. You've gone through it, you're a hero.
Well, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to share your stories with me today. It's really an honor and a pleasure, but more importantly, thank you so much for your service.
Oh, well, thank you.